In the ancient kingdom of Egypt, where gods walked with men and kings ruled as living deities, Pharaoh Ptolemy IV came to power not through merit, but by the blood that flowed through his veins. That blood, however, ran cold. Ptolemy IV Philopator, born in 245 BC, was the product of a decaying dynasty. His family, the Ptolemies, were Macedonian Greeks who ruled Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. To preserve the purity of their bloodline and keep power within the family, they often married their own siblings. This was not uncommon for Egyptian royalty, but the consequences were deadly. Ptolemy IV ascended the throne in 221 BC. His first act as king wasn't to improve the state, reform the army, or stabilize the economy. It was to murder. He eliminated any rival who could challenge his power, including his own mother. Yes, his own mother. Queen Berenice II was assassinated under suspicious circumstances shortly after Ptolemy came to power. Historians believe it was on his orders, likely orchestrated by his powerful advisor and chief minister, Sosibius. The court became a house of whispers and daggers. But then came the queen, Arsinoe III, Ptolemy's sister. He married her soon after their mother's death. In official inscriptions, they were hailed as divine siblings, echoing the gods Isis and Osiris. Their union was presented as sacred. But beneath the gold-leafed surfaces of temples and statues lay a festering reality of control, paranoia, and manipulation. Arsinoe was no passive queen. She was intelligent, popular with the people, and admired by the military. She posed a threat to her brother-husband's authority. And in a palace where power was everything, love was merely a weapon and family expendable. What began as a royal marriage soon turned into a deadly game of fear and betrayal. To the outside world, Egypt still glimmered under the sun. Its temples stood tall, its Nile still flowed, and its people still revered the pharaoh as a god. But behind the palace walls, Ptolemy IV's reign teetered on the edge of collapse. At court, the king indulged in luxuries, orgies, feasts, and religious excess. He was described by ancient historians as weak, debauched, and disinterested in governance. It was his minister Sosibius who ran the state, while the king drifted deeper into decadence. But all the while, tensions simmered across the empire. Then, a threat emerged that would test the limits of Ptolemy's rule. The Seleucid Empire. Antiochus III, known as Antiochus the Great, launched a military campaign to reclaim the territories his ancestors once controlled. Among them was Coele-Syria, a region hotly contested between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. War was inevitable. In 217 BC, Egypt and the Seleucids met at the Battle of Raphia, one of the largest battles of the Hellenistic period. It was here that Queen Arsinoe III stepped out from the shadows of the palace. While her husband partied and drank, Arsinoe rallied the Egyptian troops. She addressed them in public, praising their bravery, reminding them of their homeland, and offering lavish rewards for victory. Her presence inspired the soldiers. And when the battle began, it was not just generals who fought for Egypt. It was a queen. Against all odds, Egypt won. The Seleucids were forced to retreat. The army celebrated. The people rejoiced. But back in Alexandria, the palace grew darker. Arsinoe's popularity soared. The army now revered her more than the king. Whispers began to circulate that Arsinoe should rule alone, that the king was unworthy, that the true heart of Egypt beat in the chest of its queen. To a man like Ptolemy, whose rule was built on fear and control, this was unacceptable. And so, the sister he had once taken as wife, the woman who had helped him win his greatest victory, became his next target. Egypt had survived the war, but peace brought no relief. Behind the gilded gates of the royal palace, the bond between king and queen deteriorated into suspicion and treachery. Arsinoe III had committed the ultimate sin in Ptolemy's eyes. She had become more loved than he was. She had stood before soldiers and citizens alike. She had spoken not just as a queen, but as a leader. And unlike her brother, Arsinoe had shown strength, clarity, and moral courage. Where he had plotted and murdered, she had inspired. Where he indulged, she had governed. The people began to talk. It didn't take long for Sosibius, ever the puppeteer, to fan the flames of the king's insecurity. He whispered poison into the pharaoh's ears, that Arsinoe could conspire against him, that the army might prefer her rule, that she could have him killed, just as he had killed so many others. Soon, Arsinoe was placed under surveillance. Her guards were replaced, her movements restricted, her access to the court curtailed. She was queen in name only. And then, one night, in the depths of the palace, she vanished. There were no public announcements, no official mourning, but word leaked. Arsinoe III, the Queen of Egypt, had been murdered, almost certainly on the orders of her own husband. Some sources say Sosibius carried out the killing himself, with the king's full knowledge. Others suggest the king had her poisoned quietly, her body hidden away. Even her son, a young boy named Ptolemy V, was kept in the dark. One day he had a mother, the next she was gone. And so ended the life of a queen who had dared to rise above her station, who had shown that even in a twisted royal court, greatness could still emerge. The pharaoh had preserved his power, but at what cost? After Arsinoe's murder, Ptolemy IV descended even further into excess. He avoided public appearances, preferring instead to surround himself with sycophants, entertainers, and priests who fed his illusions of divinity. The people no longer revered him, they feared him. The army, once victorious, grew restless. The nobles whispered. Egypt, once the center of the ancient world, had become a haunted kingdom. Even in death, Arsinoe's ghost seemed to linger. Her murder had left a scar on the dynasty. Ptolemy IV tried to erase her from the official record. Her name was removed from some inscriptions. Her deeds, buried under stone. But the people remembered. In 204 BC, Ptolemy IV died suddenly. Some say it was natural. Others believe he was poisoned by his own court, just as he had poisoned it with his paranoia and cruelty. He left behind a child, Ptolemy V, only 5 years old. And without a mother to protect him, the boy would suffer the consequences of his father's sins. Egypt was plunged into chaos. Foreign kings circled like vultures. Rebellions broke out in the south. The once glorious empire fractured. And as the boy king was crowned, no mother stood at his side. Arsinoe was gone. But her story lived on, a tragic reminder of power's double edge. She had married her brother out of duty. She had served her country in its time of war. She had won the love of the people. And for that, she was silenced. Ptolemy IV is remembered not for his victories, but for his cruelty, for marrying his sister, and then murdering her. History is filled with kings who killed their enemies. But few killed those closest to them, the ones who once sat beside them on the throne. And in that act, Ptolemy IV revealed the truth of power, that even a crown, if placed on the wrong head, can become a weapon.